Chapter 1. Leaving the mountain. The drive down from the cabin feels longer than the climb up ever did. Part of that is the road itself. The Blue Ridge Mountains were never designed for speed. The curves force patience whether you have any left or not, and the deeper we descend into the trees, the more the outside world begins returning in fragments. Faded road signs, utility poles, narrow stretches of cracked pavement carved into the side of the mountain decades ago and barely maintained since. Civilization reappears slowly out here, not all at once. Nathaniel sits in the back seat behind Carver, with his wrists restrained in front of him and a darkening stain still working its way through the bandage wrapped around his shoulder. My father insisted we stop twice before leaving the mountain to reinforce it properly. Nathaniel barely reacted during either attempt. He just sat there against the truck with his eyes unfocused, like he was listening for something too far away to hear clearly anymore. That's what unsettles me most. Before the ridge, before whatever happened between us in the woods below the station, Nathaniel never felt fully present in the way other people do. Even standing directly in front of him, there was always the impression that part of him existed somewhere else at the same time. Attention divided across distances no one else could perceive. You could feel it in conversations with him, in the way he paused before answering questions nobody had spoken aloud yet, in the way silence around him never actually felt empty. Now it does. The truck hits a rut in the road hard enough to bounce all four of us slightly in our seats. My father mutters something under his breath from the passenger side while Carver steadies the wheel with one hand. Nathaniel lifts his head slowly toward the window beside him, watching the trees slide past. Then, quietly, almost to himself, he says, "I can't feel him anymore." No one answers right away. Carver keeps his attention on the road, though I can see the tightening along his jaw from where I'm sitting behind my father. He heard it. Of course he did. Carver misses very little when he's worried, and right now he's worried constantly. My father turns slightly in his seat. "The teacher," he says. Nathaniel nods once. "That's who was talking to you on the mountain." Another nod. The truck settles back into silence after that, but it isn't the same silence we left the cabin with. This one feels thinner somehow, stretched over something none of us fully understand yet. I watch Nathaniel carefully through the reflection in the side window, trying to decide whether what I'm seeing is grief, fear, or withdrawal from something deeper than either. "You said he taught you," I say finally. Nathaniel doesn't look at me when he answers. "He found me," he says. "That's different." "How?" "That takes longer." The road bends sharply left as we pass through another wall of trees, sunlight flashing in broken pieces through the windshield before disappearing again. "When someone like him notices you," Nathaniel says quietly, "your life stops belonging entirely to you after that." My father looks back at him more directly now. "That sounds a lot like control." Nathaniel gives the smallest shake of his head. "No," he says. "Control is simple. This wasn't." I feel something cold move through me then, not because of the words themselves, but because Nathaniel sounds honest in a way he never did before. The precision is gone from him now. The invisible distance. Whatever sat behind his eyes, smoothing every reaction into calculation, disappeared on that mountain, with everything else I took from him. And somewhere underneath that realization sits another one I haven't let myself examine too closely yet. If Nathaniel feels this exposed without the thing inside him, then maybe it was never just power. Maybe it was protection, too. The thought stays with me the rest of the drive down the mountain, while the trees thin and the first signs of Northern Virginia begin appearing ahead of us in faded green highway markers and distant traffic. Behind us, Nathaniel goes quiet again. Not guarded, just listening. Like part of him still expects the silence to answer back eventually. Chapter 2. The Safe House. Carver doesn't take us anywhere official. I realize that about 20 minutes after we hit the outer edge of Northern Virginia, when he exits the main highway without warning and starts weaving through a series of older industrial roads that look abandoned enough to discourage curiosity, but maintained enough to suggest someone still uses them occasionally. Storage facilities, empty distribution lots, windowless brick buildings with faded company names painted over 3 times across 30 years, the kind of places designed to disappear into peripheral vision. My father notices it too. "This isn't Quantico," he says from the passenger seat. "No," Carver replies. "That's all I'm getting?" "For now." Under normal circumstances, that answer would probably irritate him more than it does, but nothing about the last 24 hours qualifies as normal anymore. My father settles back into the seat without pushing further, though I can see the same calculation happening behind his eyes that's happening in mine. Carver made a decision somewhere between the mountain and here. Not procedural. Personal. The building itself sits at the end of a narrow service road behind a chain-link fence that probably used to support actual security before neglect became its primary defense. 4 stories. Brick exterior. Most of the windows dark except for one near the back corner of the second floor, glowing faintly behind half-closed blinds. There's no visible signage anywhere, which somehow makes it feel more governmental than if there had been. Carver parks in the rear loading area and kills the engine without speaking immediately. The silence inside the truck settles heavily around us. "We move fast," he says finally. "No unnecessary conversation outside. No names." My father glances toward the building. "You own this place?" "Not officially." That answer tells me enough. Carver steps out first, then circles around to Nathaniel's side before opening the rear door carefully. Nathaniel doesn't resist when Carver pulls him upright, but I notice the hesitation before he steps fully onto the pavement. His attention shifts upward toward the building itself, and for the first time since we left the mountain, something sharp enters his expression again. Recognition. That stops me cold. Nathaniel stares at the second-floor window for a long second before speaking. "I know this place." Carver's grip tightens slightly on his arm. "No, you don't." Nathaniel barely seems to hear him. His focus stays fixed on the building. "There were people here before," he says quietly. "Years ago." My father and I exchange a quick look while Carver studies Nathaniel with growing caution. "You've been here?" Carver asks. Nathaniel finally looks at him. "Not exactly." The way he says it bothers me immediately because I understand what he means before either of the others do. Not physically. Mentally. Carver understands it half a second later. I can see the realization settle across his face even though he tries not to show it. "That's impossible," he says. Nathaniel gives a faint shake of his head. "Not impossible. Easier." "Easier how?" I ask, before Carver can stop the conversation entirely. Nathaniel looks back toward the building. "Some places hold attention differently," he says. "Enough people thinking the same things in the same rooms for long enough, and eventually, something stays behind." The wind moves through the empty lot around us. carrying the distant noise of traffic from somewhere beyond the industrial blocks. I suddenly become aware of how exposed we are standing out here, talking about this in the open, like the world itself has gotten thinner since we brought Nathaniel down off the mountain. Carver clearly feels it too. "We're done discussing this outside," he says. He moves Nathaniel toward the rear entrance, keys already in hand. My father follows close behind while I stay back for one extra second, staring at the second-floor window. Nathaniel noticed first. The blinds move slightly, not enough to confirm anything, just enough to make me wonder if they moved at all. Then Carver opens the door, and the moment disappears beneath fluorescent hallway light and the smell of dust, old wiring, and buildings that were never meant to exist on paper. Nathaniel stops once more before crossing fully inside. And this time when he speaks, there's something almost like dread beneath the words. "He's been here too," he says quietly. Carver turns immediately. "Who?" Nathaniel looks at me instead. "The teacher." Chapter 3, Meridian. The inside of the building feels older than the outside. Not abandoned, more like preserved. The fluorescent lights hum faintly overhead as Carver leads us through a narrow corridor lined with gray-painted doors and faded emergency signage that hasn't been updated in years. The air smells recycled, dry, carrying the stale stillness of places designed for temporary occupancy that somehow became permanent through neglect and bureaucracy. Somewhere deeper in the structure, I can hear old pipes knocking softly behind the walls. The second floor opens into something more livable than operational. Small kitchen, fold-out table, reinforced windows hidden carefully behind ordinary blinds. 2 rear bedrooms with narrow beds and locked storage cabinets built into the walls. Another room farther back holds stacked bottled water, field medical kits, backup batteries, and sealed equipment containers stamped with inventory codes someone stopped caring enough to remove. The building wasn't there for comfort, but for preparedness. My father notices immediately. "This isn't really a safe house," he says. "No," Carver replies quietly. "It was meant to hold people." That answer carries more implication than explanation. Nathaniel sits where Carver places him near the far side of the room, wrists restrained again to a steel anchor point bolted discreetly into the floor beneath the chair. Whoever configured this location understood containment well enough not to advertise it openly. Nathaniel studies the room slowly, while Carver checks the windows and secondary locks with automatic precision. "You still haven't explained how you know this place," Carver says. Nathaniel's eyes move toward him carefully now. "I said I know it, not that I understand it." Carver doesn't respond immediately, but I can see the discomfort settle into him anyway. This safe house was supposed to represent distance from exposure, privacy and control. The idea that Nathaniel recognizes it in any capacity damages that illusion, whether we understand our surroundings. Carver moves past it before the conversation can deepen further. "You need access?" he asks me. I nod. He retrieves a black hardened equipment case from one of the rear storage cabinets and sets it onto the kitchen table before opening it carefully. Inside sits a compact encrypted terminal system packed into custom foam inserts alongside secured communications hardware and portable uplink equipment old enough to avoid modern oversight, but advanced enough to reconnect someone quietly if they knew what they were doing. My father stares at the setup for a second. "How many unofficial locations like this do you have?" "Less than I used to," Carver says. That answer tells me more than a number would. I sit at the table while he assembles the terminal beside me. The process is practiced enough that it immediately raises another uncomfortable realization. Carver has operated outside official systems before. Maybe not often, maybe not willingly, but enough that this doesn't feel improvised. Nathaniel watches us silently. "You heard the name already," he says eventually. Neither of us answers right away. "Meridian," he continues, "but hearing something and understanding it aren't the same thing." The terminal finishes booting with a low mechanical hum. I begin routing through DIA authentication protocols automatically, while Carver stands beside me, watching the screen. "You know what it is?" I ask Nathaniel. "No," he says. "I know what people called it." That distinction matters immediately. I enter the search manually. Meridian. No results. Not restricted. Not denied. Nothing. I try broader archive indexing next. Fragmented references, behavioral studies, historical intelligence partitions buried beneath newer database architecture. The system hesitates longer this time. Then something flashes briefly at the bottom corner of the monitor before disappearing. Meridian Initiative, restricted access. Gone almost immediately. Carver sees it too. "That was it," he says quietly. I nod slowly, already typing again. But something feels wrong now. Not because the file exists, because of how quickly it vanished once the system acknowledged the search. Too fast for ordinary archive protection. Too responsive. My stomach tightens slightly as another realization settles in beneath it. Sooner or later, both Carver and I are going to have to walk back into our jobs, pretending none of this happened. And if someone is already monitoring Meridian searches in real time, then there's a very real chance the moment we do, we'll already be visible. Chapter 4. Contact. The first thing I notice is the delay, not in the system itself, in the responses around it. Government databases always hesitate under classified search conditions because too many permissions are being checked simultaneously across too many secured partitions. That part feels normal, predictable. What doesn't feel normal is the timing afterward. Every search connected to Meridian returns just slightly differently than the last one, like something behind the system is adapting while I work. I try another archive branch using older DIA, behavioral indexing protocols. This time, the terminal pauses long enough for me to hear the low mechanical ticking inside the portable uplink hardware beside the monitor. Then another partial reference appears. Meridian Initiative, Cognitive Response Division, authorization required. Gone again. Not blocked. Immediately removed. Carver sees it happen over my shoulder. "Can you recover it?" I'm trying. But I already know recovery isn't the problem. Someone is actively intercepting the query path itself. The realization crawls slowly through me while I continue working, pulling older search structures apart piece by piece, looking for fragments hidden beneath renaming protocols and departmental migrations. Most Black projects disappear by changing names. Meridian disappeared by breaking itself apart. That takes planning. "Try personnel records," Carver says quietly beside me. And I do. Nothing at first. Then one partial index opens briefly before collapsing into a permissions denial. Ward, Selene. Status, Deke. The rest disappears before I can finish reading it. Carver leans closer. "You caught that?" "Yes." "Deceased?" "Maybe." The uncertainty bothers me immediately because the system didn't deny the search cleanly. It interrupted it. there's a difference. One is automated. The other feels responsive. Behind us, Nathaniel shifts slightly in the chair. "You're attracting attention now," he says quietly. Neither of us looks back at him. "How would you know?" Carver asks. Nathaniel takes a moment before answering. "Because someone with the right clearance is probably counting your keystrokes and predicting your inputs before you make them." My father is standing near the rear hallway, reviewing one of the old case boxes Carver pulled from storage earlier. But even he stops moving at that. "You saying they monitor all of this?" he asks. Nathaniel shakes his head slightly. "Not everything, just certain words. Meridian. Selene Ward. Maybe us now, too." The thought forms before I can stop it. I continue working anyway because movement feels safer than stillness. Search. Archive. Redirect. Cross-reference. The rhythm steadies me enough that I almost miss the first sign something else is wrong. Pressure. The familiar intrusiveness I would feel before Nathaniel took control. But this was different in a way that felt seamless and precise. Soft. Soft enough at first that I mistake it for exhaustion. We haven't slept properly in nearly 2 days. My thoughts feel overused already, stretched thin from adrenaline and constant vigilance. But this feels different. Focused. Intentional. Like someone standing just outside a closed door listening carefully before deciding whether to knock. I stop typing. Carver notices immediately. "What's wrong?" I don't answer right away because I'm trying to identify the sensation before speaking it aloud. The room around me remains perfectly ordinary. Fluorescent lights. Old ventilation. Nathaniel breathing quietly somewhere behind me. My father turning another page in a case file near the hallway. And underneath all of it, attention. Careful. Measured. Patient. Nathaniel notices my expression almost immediately. That changes his. Fear moves across his face so quickly it barely has time to settle before he forces it back down again. But I still catch it. Real fear. "What?" Carver asks again, sharper now. Nathaniel answers before I can. "He found her." The room goes still. My father looks up immediately. "Who?" Nathaniel doesn't take his eyes off me. "The teacher." The pressure deepens slightly then, not invasive the way Nathaniel always felt, but observational. Curious. There's no force behind it yet. No attempt to push past anything. Just presence so controlled it somehow becomes worse. Then, calmly, somewhere just adjacent to my thoughts, a voice speaks. "You cannot comprehend the complexity of the situation you find yourself in, but you will know soon enough." I freeze instantly, because this feels nothing like Nathaniel ever did. Chapter 5. The Teacher. The voice doesn't sound physical. That's the first thing my mind latches onto because it's easier than processing the rest of it. Nathaniel's presence always felt invasive when he entered someone. Immediate. Violent in subtle ways. Even when he wasn't forcing control, there was pressure behind everything he touched, like standing too close to electrical equipment humming beneath the walls. This is different. The voice arrives without impact. Calm. Older, maybe, though not old in any ordinary sense. Controlled so completely that for one disorienting second it feels less like hearing someone speak and more like realizing they've already been there longer than you noticed. Carver is still looking at me, waiting for an explanation I can't give him yet. "What's happening?" he asks. I barely hear him. The pressure around my thoughts shifts slightly again, careful and observant. Not pushing deeper. Measuring. You removed something that should not have been removable, the voice says. Nathaniel lowers his eyes immediately. That reaction frightens me more than the voice itself. Not obedience. Recognition. My father takes one step toward me, instinct overriding confusion now. Mara? I raise one hand slightly without looking away from the terminal screen, even though I'm no longer seeing it clearly. The room feels divided now, layered over something else just outside ordinary perception. Not visual, conceptual, like attention itself has gained weight. Can he hear us? I ask. Nathaniel answers before the voice does. Yes. The calmness of that response tells me he already understands something the rest of us don't. Then the voice returns. Not the same way your ears send signals to process inputs, the teacher says. You're translating our contact into language because it's easier for you. My pulse quickens despite myself. This is the teacher. The title feels strange attached to an actual presence after hearing it spoken indirectly for so long. Nathaniel talked about him the way people describe weather systems or natural disasters. Real enough to fear, but distant enough to remain abstract. There's nothing abstract about this. What are you? I ask before I can stop myself. A pause follows that. Not hesitation. Consideration. A disappointing question, he replies. Somewhere behind me, I hear my father mutter softly under his breath, while Carver watches me with growing concern, trying to evaluate a conversation only half visible from his side of it. What does he want? Carver asks carefully. The teacher answers him through me. To understand why Nathaniel failed. Nathaniel's jaw tightens visibly at that. He didn't fail, I say, before I realize I'm defending him. Another pause. No, the teacher says quietly. His hubris got the better of him. Arrogance and the fact he underestimated you is why he finds himself in his current state. The pressure against my awareness deepens slightly then, and for the first time, I feel actual movement beneath it. Attention narrowing. Searching gently along the edges of my thoughts with terrifying precision. Not forced entry. Examination. Instinct takes over before conscious thought catches up. I push back. Not outward. Backward. The moment the contact brushes deeper against me, something inside my mind reacts automatically, tracing the route the same way I did on the mountain with Nathaniel. Not resistance. Recognition. For one impossible second, I feel him, not his thoughts. Him. Distance. Restraint. Intelligence held so tightly in control that even the impression of it feels dangerous. Then everything stops. The pressure vanishes instantly. Not broken. Withdrawn. Across the room, Nathaniel looks up sharply, real alarm crossing his face now. Carver notices it too. What just happened? I don't answer immediately because I'm still recovering from the sensation of contact. My head throbs suddenly behind my eyes. Warmth slides slowly beneath my nose. I touch it instinctively. Blood. Smut. Enough. The room remains perfectly silent for 2 full seconds before the teacher speaks again. Softer now. That shouldn't be possible. Then the connection disappears completely. No fade, no withdrawal I can track. Just absence. I inhale sharply and realize only then that I haven't taken a full breath since the contact began. My father moves beside me immediately while Carver turns toward Nathaniel. "What did she do?" Carver asks. Nathaniel looks at me carefully, almost in disbelief now. "I don't think he understands what just happened," he replies. And for the first time since we brought him off the mountain, Nathaniel looks relieved that someone else might finally realize how dangerous this actually is. Chapter 6. After the contact. Nobody speaks for several seconds after the teacher disappears. The room stays exactly the same physically, but everything inside it feels recalibrated now, like the pressure system changed without warning, and nobody trusts the air anymore. My father keeps one hand lightly against my shoulder, while I sit at the table trying to steady the pounding behind my eyes. The blood stopped almost immediately, but the dull ache beneath my skull remains, spreading slowly outward from somewhere deeper than a normal headache should exist. Carver is still staring at Nathaniel. His expression looks angry, but I know it's just intense focus. The difference is noticed by Nathaniel as well. "What exactly was that?" Carver asks quietly. Nathaniel doesn't answer immediately because for the first time since we brought him down from the mountains, he genuinely seems uncertain himself. His eyes move toward me again, cautious now, in a way they weren't before. Not fear, exactly. Reevaluation. "He contacted her directly," Nathaniel says finally. "I got that part," Carver replies. "How?" Nathaniel lowers his eyes briefly, searching for language that fits something none of us fully understand. "He normally doesn't need proximity," he says. "Distance isn't important to him the way it was to me." My father folds his arms tighter across his chest. "That's supposed to make us feel better?" "No," Nathaniel says quietly. "It's supposed to make you understand the difference." That settles heavily across the room, because now we finally have scale. Nathaniel was dangerous because he could enter people, influence them, use them. The teacher feels dangerous because physical space itself doesn't seem especially relevant to him at all. Carver turns toward me again. "What happened when you pushed back?" "I didn't push," I say automatically, though even while saying it, I realize the wording feels wrong. "I followed it." Nathaniel's expression tightens immediately at that. "That's worse." My father looks between us. Can somebody start speaking in full sentences? I wipe the remaining blood carefully from beneath my nose with the back of my hand before answering. When he tried to get deeper into my head, I could feel where the contact was coming from. "That shouldn't happen," Nathaniel says. I look at him. "You keep saying that." "Because it shouldn't." There's frustration beneath his voice now, but not directed at me. At himself, maybe. Or at the fact that whatever rules he understood no longer apply cleanly around me. Carver notices it too. "You never saw anyone do that before," he says. Nathaniel shakes his head slowly. "No." "Not even him?" Another pause. Then, carefully, "Nothing like this was known to us. This is a new development." My father steps away toward the kitchen counter, needing movement the way some people need silence. He picks up one of the unopened water bottles from the supply shelf and twists the cap loose harder than necessary. "So what now?" he asks. Because from where I'm standing, we've officially crossed into territory where none of this stays manageable much longer. No one argues. Carver moves toward the terminal again, attention narrowing back onto practical concerns because that's what he does under pressure. He organizes, re-centers, keeps motion alive long enough to avoid panic. If the teacher found her through Meridian access, then somebody monitoring those systems may be in contact with him, he says. Nathaniel gives a faint shake of his head. Not necessarily. Carver turns sharply. You got a better interpretation? Yes. Nathaniel looks directly at me again before continuing. He wasn't looking for Meridian, he continues. He was looking for her. The room goes silent again. Not dramatic silence. The kind that arrives when everyone understands the implications immediately and nobody wants to say them first. Because if the teacher found me independently of the database searches, then he may have already known I existed before tonight ever happened. My father sets the water bottle down slowly. That possible? Nathaniel's answer comes almost immediately. Yes. Carver studies him carefully. Then why wait until now? Nathaniel doesn't respond right away. His gaze drifts toward the darkened window beside him again, toward the city somewhere beyond the reinforced glass. He must be curious about the depth of her ability, he says softly. And somewhere beneath the exhaustion, beneath the fear, beneath the growing awareness that our lives are already moving away from anything recognizable, another realization begins forming quietly inside me. The teacher may have contacted me to evaluate a threat, but by the end of the conversation, I think he became uncertain which one of us he was evaluating anymore. Chapter 7. The plan. We establish rules after that. Not because rules will solve any of this, but because people fall apart faster without them. Carver takes control of the conversation before panic or speculation can spread into something less manageable. Nobody discusses the teacher outside this building. Nobody accesses Meridian through unsecured systems. Nobody leaves alone. The instructions come quickly and cleanly, the same way he handled tactical planning back at the cabin, except now there's strain underneath it that wasn't there before. Because this is no longer theoretical. Something reached directly into the room with us. My father listens from the kitchen counter while Carver talks, arms folded again, eyes moving occasionally toward Nathaniel, like he still hasn't fully decided whether the man in the chair belongs in the category of victim or threat. Probably both. Nathaniel himself stays quiet through most of it, which somehow draws more attention to him instead of less. Before the mountain, he controlled every room he entered without effort. Now he seems trapped inside his own absence, listening to conversations he can no longer feel ahead of time. I understand that feeling better than I want to. Carver finishes outlining the immediate priorities before looking at me directly. You and I need to check in eventually. I nod immediately because I've already been thinking the same thing. DIA absence protocols aren't dramatic, but they're consistent. Miss enough communication windows without explanation, and eventually somebody notices. Maybe not because they care personally, just because systems are designed to recognize broken patterns. Carver's situation with the FBI works differently, but arrives at the same destination eventually. We can buy another day, he says. Maybe two. After that? My father asks. Carver exhales slowly. After that, we either show our faces, or somebody starts asking why we haven't. Nathaniel finally speaks again from across the room. If Meridian is active inside either agency, they may already know. The statement settles heavily into the silence. My father looks over at him sharply. You keep saying Meridian like it's a group. Nathaniel shakes his head slightly. It wasn't originally. Then what was it? Nathaniel takes longer answering this time. his attention unfocused slightly, like he's sorting through information he was never meant to fully understand himself. A screening process, he says eventually. Identification, observation, monitoring people before they became problems. Problems to who? I ask. That depended on who was running it at the time. That answer irritates Carver visibly. You keep talking in fragments. Because that's how I learned it, Nathaniel replies. Nobody explained Meridian to me. You picked things up if you survived long enough. My father studies him carefully for another second. And the teacher? Nathaniel looks away immediately. That reaction alone answers enough. He knew more, Nathaniel says. A lot more. Was he part of Meridian? Carver asks. I don't know. This time I believe him. Carver starts pacing slowly near the far side of the room, not restless exactly, just thinking through movement. If Meridian existed across multiple agencies, he says, mostly to himself now, then compartmentalization would have kept most people blind to the whole thing. Which means infiltration becomes easy, I say. Carver nods once. Not spies, not double agents. Something worse. People working inside systems without realizing the system itself has already been compromised above them. The thought crawls under my skin slowly because I suddenly understand how impossible this becomes once we step fully back into the world outside this building. Every badge, every database, every supervisor, every request for authorization. None of it can be trusted completely anymore because we have no way of measuring how deep any of this actually goes. My father breaks the silence before it can harden too far. So what's the plan? He asks. Carver stops pacing. We build small, he says. Nobody gets the full picture. Need to know only. A task force, my father says. Carver considers that wording for a second before nodding once. Unofficially. And officially? I ask. Carver looks at me carefully. Officially, he says, we're all pretending this ended on that mountain. Nobody says anything after that, because every person in the room understands the same thing at the same time. That may already be impossible. Across the room, Nathaniel lowers his eyes again, listening to a silence only he seems fully afraid of. And somewhere far beyond this building, I can't stop thinking about the teacher, experiencing me reach back toward him for the first time, because people like him don't become curious accidentally. Chapter 8. Selene Ward. Carver eventually disappears into one of the rear rooms to make calls through channels he trusts just enough to risk using. My father stays in the common area pretending to review old case notes while actually keeping watch over Nathaniel every few minutes, whether he realizes he's doing it or not. The building settles around us gradually as night pushes fully against the windows, fluorescent light replacing whatever remained of the evening outside. I go back to the terminal because movement still feels safer than thought. The Meridian search history remains fragmented across the monitor exactly where I left it. Broken references, partial archive recoveries, metadata trails disappearing into permissions partitions that technically shouldn't exist anymore. The deeper I go, the less the system behaves like an ordinary classified database, and the more it starts feeling defensive. Not protected. Aware. I know that's irrational. Databases don't become conscious because someone buried sensitive material inside them. But there's intentionality behind the architecture here that keeps bothering me. Meridian wasn't hidden once. It was hidden repeatedly over time by people expecting someone else to eventually come looking for it. Which means someone always does. I reroute the search through older behavioral sciences indexing protocols next, using terminology most current systems stopped prioritizing years ago. Cognitive displacement, identity fracture events, dissociative transference. Half the language sounds clinical enough to dismiss until you recognize what it's actually describing. People like Nathaniel. People like me now, too. The system stalls for almost 15 seconds before returning another partial result. Ward, Selene. Cognitive Response Division. Authorized Observer Status, Level. Gone again. I catch it this time before it disappears completely and immediately isolate the cache partition locally before the system can scrub it. Primitive trick. Old enough that modern oversight systems often ignore it because nobody expects analysts to work this way anymore. A second fragment opens beneath it. Subject contact event. Containment failed. No date attached. No destination. No explanation of what containment actually means. My pulse quickens slightly as I keep reading through the corrupted fragments that follow. Most of it is incomplete. Redactions layered over redactions until entire sections have become structural blanks inside the file itself. But Selene Ward appears repeatedly across multiple archived references tied to behavioral observation projects spanning nearly 15 years. Not military operations. Research. That bothers me more. Scientists build systems differently than soldiers do. Slower, more carefully. They observe first. They measure. They justify. Whatever Meridian became later, it started with someone trying to understand this phenomenon before somebody else realized it could be weaponized. Footsteps move quietly behind me. I glance up, expecting Carver. It's Nathaniel, not free. My father still has hold of the restraint chain attached to his wrists, guiding him carefully from the bathroom down the hallway toward the common area again. Even injured and powerless, nobody in this building fully relaxes around him anymore. Nathaniel notices the screen immediately. Selene Ward, he says softly. I study him carefully. You know her. No. The answer comes too fast. You recognize the name. Nathaniel stays quiet for a moment while my father watches both of us carefully from behind him. She was discussed, Nathaniel says eventually. Although, not openly. By who? Nathaniel's eyes drift toward the dark windows again before answering. People who survived long enough to hear older stories. Something about that wording tightens in my chest immediately. What happened to her? I ask. Nathaniel lowers his voice slightly. The teacher respected her. That sentence changes the room, not because it explains anything, because Nathaniel fears almost everyone connected to this world in one way or another. But respect is the first human word he's attached to the teacher so far. My father notices it too. She worked with him, he says. Nathaniel shakes his head slowly. No, he says. I think she understood him. That feels more dangerous somehow. I turn back toward the terminal and reopen the final corrupted file fragment, still sitting partially cached beneath the collapsed archive partitions. Most of the text remains unreadable, except for one surviving line buried near the bottom of the report. Subject exhibited reciprocal contact response. I stare at it for several seconds before realizing my breathing has slowed. Reciprocal contact. Behind me, Nathaniel goes very still. And without looking away from the screen, I suddenly realize something that makes the room feel colder around me. Selene Ward may have reached back too.
Chapter 9. The Teacher. Mara is more than she understands. That thought remains with me long after the contact ends. I sit alone in a darkened room, several states away from Northern Virginia, with a recorder turning slowly beside stacks of paper files no agency officially acknowledges anymore. The building around me is quiet except for rain touching old glass somewhere down the hallway, and the low electrical hum of equipment designed before modern systems learned how to monitor themselves properly. Isolation has advantages when maintained carefully enough. Most people misunderstand that. They think solitude creates weakness when in reality it removes interference. Nathaniel understood that once. Or he almost did. The lamp beside the desk throws just enough light across the room to illuminate fragments without revealing everything fully. Names written across folders, dates, behavioral observations, activation timelines. Most of the files are old enough now that the paper itself has begun yellowing at the edges despite preservation efforts. Governments digitize because they believe data becomes safer once abstracted. They forget abstraction creates vulnerability too. Networks can be penetrated, systems observed. I replay the contact carefully in my mind. Not Mara herself, the reaction. Reciprocal contact response. The phrase returns uninvited from years earlier, attached to another voice entirely. Selene Ward sitting across a steel table under observation lighting while trying very hard not to appear frightened during our final conversation together. She understood faster than the others did. Faster than Meridian was prepared for. That was always the problem with exceptionally intelligent people. Eventually, they stop accepting the boundaries handed to them by less intelligent systems. Most organizations mistake compliance for stability. Meridian made that mistake repeatedly. I close the file currently open on the desk in front of me and lean back slightly in the chair, letting the room settle around the silence again. Nathaniel's absence remains noticeable even now. For years he existed at the edge of my awareness constantly, not important enough to require direct supervision, but useful enough to monitor intermittently. A capable infiltrator. Ambitious. Emotional beneath the discipline. Predictable because of it. Now there is simply emptiness where he used to exist. Not death, removal. That should not have been possible. More importantly, Mara Vale accomplished it instinctively. The realization continues bothering me in ways I dislike examining too closely. Most emerging infiltrators require years before they understand how to navigate another consciousness cleanly without losing themselves inside the process. Nathaniel developed faster than average, which made him dangerous. Mara appears to be developing differently altogether. Not stronger exactly. More adaptive. Her mind recognizes intrusion patterns almost immediately and responds without formal conditioning. Evolution through exposure. The possibility is deeply concerning. I rise from the desk and cross slowly toward the rain-darkened window overlooking the empty property outside. No neighboring structures visible from here. No unnecessary roads nearby. Places like this survive because people stopped noticing them decades ago. Another lesson Meridian never fully appreciated. Invisibility works better when nobody needs to actively maintain it anymore. Behind me, the recorder continues turning softly. I think again about the moment she followed the contact backward. Not resisted, tracked. No fear inside the response either. Instinct, curiosity, anger perhaps, but not fear. Interesting, very interesting. Somewhere beyond the walls of this room, systems are already beginning to react to her existence. DIA query flags, Meridian archive disruptions, Internal observation networks waking carefully after years of dormancy. They will move cautiously at first, because institutions always do. Committees, evaluations, compartmentalized discussions between individuals who believe secrecy still guarantees control. It does not anymore. I rest one hand lightly against the cold window glass while rainwater moves slowly downward through the darkness outside. Selene Ward understood that too near the end. That memory stays with me longer than most. Finally, after several minutes, I return to the desk and open a clean notebook beside the recorder. The page remains blank briefly while I consider the wording carefully. Then I write 3 words: Mara Vale, active. I stare at the name for another moment before adding a second line beneath it. Assess immediately. The rain continues outside, and somewhere far away, whether she realizes it yet or not. Mara has already stepped behind the curtain, and what is seen cannot be unseen.